we're talking about Latin, basically a general introduction of Latin from the perspective of an English speaker and why it is useful. If I have convinced you by the end of this that Latin is very beneficial, I hope that you'll book a lesson with me. In the meantime, if this is your first time on my channel, be sure to press the subscribe button and at least like the video so I can make more of them for you. Now, let's get started learning Latin. It's 10 p.m. You're not tired enough to sleep and you want to read something. You've been learning Latin for the past 4 years. You think, hey, I want to read something in Latin, but my only options are war and politics. Oh, it's too late for that. Well, I'm happy to tell you that you actually have many, many more options. Latin is over 2,000 years old. You can only imagine how much has been written in that amount of time. If you want a romance, if you want something on religion and spirituality, or maybe some original music, it's all available to you. Additionally, Latin is very accessible because it uses the Roman alphabet, which is what we use as English speakers. Now, there are some differences. They don't have the J or the W, and I understand this, but generally speaking, you will be able to navigate it just fine. And Latin sounds really beautiful. It can be very melodic in the way that it is spoken, especially in poetry. I would like to play just a little sample for you of Latin poetry so that you can hear it and get even more excited as we approach learning more about Latin.
Ille triumphata Capitolia ad alta Corinto, Victor aget currum caesis insignis Achivis, eruet illargos Agamemnoniasque Mycenas.
First start working with a new student, they immediately see that Latin and English are very different. Primarily in word order and the fact that Latin is an inflected language. They kind of overreact. Mayday, mayday. They say, wait, Latin has so many less words. When I translate into English, I'm adding so many words. I must be doing something wrong. And then I tell them, I say, okay, think about a raisin and a grape. And of course, raisins come from grapes. They are very connected. English is like a grape. It's very fat with words, very many words, and it's just juicy and plump, and we convey a lot with many, many words. Latin, on the other hand, is the raisin. They try to say the most with the least amount of words. They have just sucked out every superfluous word they possibly can. And so what you're left with is two very different fruits. So when you move from one to the other, you have to kind of inflate the grape or deflate the grape, depending. And I find that this really helps in that transitional moment, both to say it's okay to add words if you're translating to English, and also to say that these are distinct languages. They are different. Though they may have similarities, they operate different. They may, to continue the idea of fruit, taste different and have different textures. And we need to appreciate this and understand it. Well, what does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with an inflected language. But what does that even mean? An inflected language is when you have variable endings on the nouns, adjectives, and verbs that convey the relationship between words, the grammar. Here I show you how the verb works. You have the finite verb and the infinitive verb, finite coming from the Latin word for ending. And what you attached to that verb will tell you the person, so whether it's I go or he goes, the number, one person, many people, the tense, when it happened, the mood, whether it's a fact or a potentiality, and also the voice, whether he did it or it was done to him. And you attach that to the verb and it conveys all of that information instead of having additional words around the verb. On the flip side, the infinitive does not change and it basically just conveys the most basic form of the verb from what you can build off of. Now let's look at the noun. The noun has numbers, so is it 1 or 2 or more, gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, just like you see in French, Spanish, in many languages. Declension. Declensions are basically for spelling. It's types and formulas for you to use for spelling. And then the case. Now, the case system is quite interesting. Again, these, just like what we saw with the verbs, you're putting specific endings on the noun to convey some information. Let's look at that. The nominative, so this conveys the subjects. This is basically the most basic ending, the one that you see first in the dictionary. Then genitive is for possessive, so the farmer's field. Dative, indirect object, I gave the ball to the boy. Accusative, direct object, I hold a ball. Ablative, this in some ways is kind of a catch-all. It wears very, very many hats, but most often it's the by or with. I use especially in prepositional phrases. I walk with my friend. And then vocative, which is used infrequently, it's basically a direct address. So come here, Quintus. And here you can see a lot of information is being conveyed just by the endings themselves. And this is how it differs from English. English, we have lots of words around the noun, around the verb. But Latin is able to carry these meanings inside of itself, basically inside of the word, using these special endings. And it makes it very interesting, but it can also make it difficult. So understanding that helps you to be able to read and understand more earlier on. Latin is not done with you yet. It's going to throw one more major curveball. And this is the curveball that I deal with the most every day. Word order. So, since Latin is able to carry its grammar with itself using endings, that frees up where it needs to be placed in the sentence. I have an analogy for you. I want you to think of Latin and English like an office. Now, you go into an office and you see a bookcase and you see a table and a lamp and a laptop and a notebook. Now, on the other hand, a student has a backpack, and in that backpack he has his laptop and a notebook and a pen and maybe a light, like a reading light. And that's also kind of an office. It's just a traveling one. And this is how we can think about these two languages. English is about placement, like where you place things in an office. Whereas Latin is more portable since it carries so much with itself, it can move around. That doesn't mean that Latin doesn't have word order, but it frees itself up a lot more than in English. So let's keep this in mind. And then when we see the word order, like when we see the direct object being the first word of the sentence, or when we see a prepositional phrase being broken up by one word in the middle, it's not so scary because we're training ourselves to, in many ways, label these words. So you see a word and you say, okay, it's a noun. It's not just a noun. It needs to be nominative or accusative, and we need to know whether it's singular or plural. Now, at first, when you first start, it's hard to remember to label and it's hard to label itself. But then when you read more and more, it becomes automatic. And so later on, when you're reading Latin comfortably, and when you see the traveling backpack office system where words can be anywhere they want, especially when you read Cicero, then it's not so strange. And as you go more into Latin and you're remembering that it's a different language, and you're starting to appreciate the fact that it has its own beauty, it has its own practical basically methods of conveying things, and you just appreciate it for itself. And the further you get into Latin, the further you decide to forget English, and you stop bonding them and you start separating them, and you can appreciate Latin for what it is and the beauty that it has. And so I want to conclude today just by talking about the value of learning Latin and then just showing you some more Latin so that you can come and enjoy it as much as I do. Because these differences, they're at the beginning. Once you get past them, you get past them, and then you're free to read so much exciting things, from romance to politics to war to religion to anything that you want. 2,000 years worth of writing is just automatically available to you if you can crack the code and appreciate and enjoy Latin. So let's talk about the benefits of learning Latin so that you can be even more convinced. There are 3 main benefits of learning Latin. The first of which is vocabulary. Your vocabulary is going to grow. When you learn Latin words, you're going to see components of those words in English. So if you learn ira, which means anger, then you're going to see ira in the English words irascible and irritation and ire. Or if you learn dormire, which means to sleep, then you're going to think of dormitory and to lay dormant. And this is going to happen very fast. Additionally, words you already know in Latin are suddenly going to become more interesting, and they're going to kind of open up to you. Take a really simple word like exit. Exit comes from Latin. So ex means to go out, and eat comes from ire, which means to go. So when we exit, we are going out. And additionally, you'll see Latin in words of other foreign languages. So just in doing your daily work for learning Latin, you're going to be learning more English, you're going to be learning words in other languages that you can maybe activize later. It's just going to totally change your vocabulary forever. You are going to learn some grammar. In the process of learning really any foreign language, you learn grammar. And today I've been talking about Latin grammar. And it is a very grammar-heavy language, admittedly. And in just learning it, you're going to be able to answer the questions of what does it mean to be a noun? What does it mean to be a verb? How do you have things agree in the sentence? How do I distinguish an adverb from an adjective? And in answering these questions for Latin, you're going to answer them for English. And you're going to appreciate the fundamentals of grammar that can be carried over to any other language. It's a really vital skill, and it's one that starts in Latin. You will be able to read some really awesome literature. My goal here today was basically to introduce you to Latin, especially from the perspective of an English speaker. I hope that I have convinced you that Latin is a wonderful opportunity, both in terms of reading amazing literature, but also in terms of learning grammar and building your vocabulary. If I haven't convinced you of that, well, all the best of luck to you. But I do hope to hear from you. Reply in the comments if I have motivated you to start learning. And of course, you can always contact me personally. But until then, I will bid you adieu and wish you a wonderful day. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye. Thank you.